Recent report says the world is producing twice as much plastic waste as it did 20 years ago. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development released the report saying only 9% of those plastics are successfully recycled. The OECD wants more to be done to create a separate and well-functioning market for recycled plastics. The organization's principal administrator, Peter Borky, joins me from Paris to discuss the report further. Peter, thanks for joining us. Indeed, also the circular economic lead for the Environment Directorate at the OECD. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Reading through the synopsis of the report released by your organization did not make for very pleasant reading. How is it possible, with all that we have learned, especially over the last 2 decades, that we haven't even seen a dip in the amount of plastics being produced? In fact, the exact opposite. It's doubled. How is it possible that we are in this situation right now?
Good evening, and thank you, Marcel, for inviting me and giving us this opportunity to talk about the report. The situation clearly is linked to the fabulousness of plastics. They are very cheap. They are very versatile material that can be used almost anywhere. In almost all applications that we use every day, you find plastics. And plastics consumption and production have doubled over the last 20 years, driven by demographic and economic growth. And in fact, the use of plastics is growing much faster, actually 40% faster than GDP. So I think this is an important reason, and the other reason is when you look at where most plastic that leaks into the environment comes from, you will see that it mostly comes from emerging economies, fast-growing emerging economies, where the buildup of waste management infrastructure has not followed the pace of economic development, essentially.
Where then, in your research, where then is it pointing to as being the source of the issue? Is education and awareness around the need to use less plastics or no plastics at all being focused too much on the end user, like you and I, to ensure that you take a cloth bag to the shop, to ensure that you don't support or that you don't put your fruit and veg in an extra plastic bag, and the list goes on? Should the focus be more on the companies who are producing the plastics and the companies that are buying this plastics to put their product in? Where is the source of the major issue?
We see the whole life cycle to be at issue here, and you cannot intervene at a single point and expect the problem to be solved. Basically, all actors, economic actors along the life cycle have to do something about the problem. It starts with the way plastics are designed. They need to be designed in a way that they can be recycled more easily, that they are less litter prone. You also need, of course, to improve the production, which by the way, produces a lot of greenhouse gases. Of course, plastics are mostly fossil fuel based. And it goes on to the level of you and me, consumers, who also have to change their behavior, switch to reusable options where this is possible. Maybe rather than buying more stuff, going for services and experiences instead. There's a really profound change that is needed all along the value chain. And then, of course, the waste management, as I said before, that needs to be reinforced. New infrastructure needs to be built, collection infrastructure, waste treatment and recycling infrastructure.
Let's talk a little bit about that waste management being key. I mean, I've watched various reports and read various articles about how major countries who do produce a lot of waste in especially small spaces are not being completely honest with how they are managing their waste. They make it look all hunky-dory for their citizens who feel good about them recycling every week, but they're not explaining how they're getting rid of it. And indeed, in some countries, I understand, they're just shipping off the problem to another piece of land or another piece of ocean in another country. Do we need governments to step up in terms of policing that kind of waste management and to bring forward more stern policies to ensure that that waste management is indeed honest and transparent?
Absolutely. And policy intervention is both needed at the domestic level to, as I said before, strengthen waste management, but also create incentives for better product design that encourages recycling and recyclability. But as you point out, some waste, of course, is traded as well. And in fact, our member countries in the OECD, which are some of the most developed countries, have been the major source of waste plastic exports. And this has been recognized as being a problem because sometimes this waste then goes to places that are ill-positioned to actually deal with it in an appropriate way. And measures have been undertaken. The Basel Convention, which is a convention that addresses waste, trade in waste, particularly hazardous waste, but which also covers plastic waste. Also in the OECD, we have a decision on transboundary movements of waste. And in both contexts, in fact, restrictions to the export of plastic waste have been strengthened. And we're beginning to see the first effects of that. The volumes of trade of waste that is traded are diminishing, and more of it remains within rich countries now, and less of it reaches places in Asia mostly, which is the region which was most exposed to this waste.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for that insight and for bringing it across in an understandable way. That was Pieter Boortjie. He is the Circular Economic Lead for the Environment Directorate with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, speaking to us live there from Paris in France.